The first time I heard Victor say the words, 5 million, I didn't feel pride. I felt distance. He stood at the front of the boardroom, gesturing toward a slide that bore my work, my structure, my numbers, presented in a tone that made it all sound like a lucky break. "The project closed at 5 million, he announced, like he had personally signed the deal with his own hands. Applause followed. Wide smiles, approving nods, congratulatory murmurs. No one looked in my direction. No one said my name, but I was the one who had built the entire thing from the ground up. 11 months of work, dozens of late-night calls, a prototype sprint that nearly derailed twice, and a series of client interventions that only held because I had been the one holding them. I didn't expect a trophy. I didn't need a headline, but I did expect something. A moment, a sentence, a single line of recognition. Instead, Victor closed his presentation by gesturing to someone sitting 2 seats from him. "And moving forward, the client will be under the strategic guidance of Eva Lansing, our newly appointed Director of Growth Integration." Eva smiled. Composed. Perfect. Her promotion had never been mentioned to me. Her role on the project had been non-existent. She hadn't been in the first 6 months of planning. She wasn't in the room when we restructured the financial model. She wasn't on the call when Core Unity nearly backed out over a compliance issue. But here she was now, named as the new lead, introduced as if she had carried the weight. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask for clarification. I simply placed my pen back in my notebook and folded my hands. Because I knew what this was. It wasn't a mistake. It was a rewrite. Clean. Surgical. Performed without acknowledgement so that there would be no moment to push back against. That's how quiet erasure works. Not through attack, but through omission. The meeting ended. People filed out, still buzzing with numbers and momentum. Victor shook hands like a man who'd just scored a win. Eva stayed close, smiling without speaking, as though proximity might make the illusion stick. I walked back to my office, alone. No one followed. No one asked how I felt. I sat down, stared at the project folder on my desktop, and let the silence settle in. Then, slowly, I opened the compensation framework I'd signed nearly 2 years earlier. Clause 6.3, profit-based incentive eligibility for strategic leads of closed projects exceeding $2.5 million, subject to final approval. Strategic lead, closed project, 5 million. I met every condition. The incentive wasn't a gift. It was contractual, earned. But Victor hadn't brought it up. No email, no memo, not even a discussion. And I knew why. If they could shift the narrative fast enough, if they could promote Eva as the public face quickly enough, they could reframe the entire project as team-based. No lead, no bonus, no recognition. Just quiet dilution. I closed the document. Not because I gave up, but because I understood that this wasn't just about money. It was about authorship. They wanted the deal, the praise, the prestige, but they didn't want the memory of who made it possible. I wasn't just being cut out of a bonus. I was being cut out of the story. I didn't ask questions. I didn't write an email. I didn't walk into Victor's office demanding an explanation, because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an orchestration, and I knew better than to interrupt a performance still in motion. Instead, I stayed exactly where they left me, silent, steady, invisible, and I started watching, not with resentment, but with intent. I watched as Eva began sitting in on calls she hadn't earned, speaking in meetings she didn't understand, echoing phrases I had used in strategy briefs she had never seen the drafts of. I watched her nod confidently when clients asked technical questions, only to loop in someone else 2 hours later to find the real answer. I watched Victor brag about seamless leadership transitions to the board, smiling as if seamlessness wasn't just another word for silence. I didn't argue. I built a folder, quietly, methodically. I compiled email threads, proposal drafts, meeting recordings, everything with my name, my timestamp, my delivery. Not to weaponize, just to document. Because when the narrative starts shifting, memory becomes unreliable, but records don't lie. 1 week later, a small sign arrived. An unexpected one. Procurement reached out, not to me, but to the general strategy inbox, with a request for a breakdown of how implementation budgets had been allocated. Eva forwarded it to me with a simple note. "Not sure where this is stored. Can you help?" I replied with the spreadsheet and said nothing more. She didn't thank me. She never did, but I could feel the hesitation in her tone. She was beginning to realize what I already knew. It's easy to inherit the title, harder to carry the weight. Still, I remained silent. I didn't loop in HR. I didn't CC leadership. I let them play out their version of the story, because the deeper they believed it, the more they built on unstable ground. And when it cracked, I wanted no one to question where I had been standing. One evening, as I was leaving late, I passed by a glass meeting room. Eva was inside, mid-call, attempting to walk a client through a decision tree I had written. I could tell from the way her finger hovered above the printed sheet, the way her mouth stumbled slightly through the terminology, that she didn't understand it. Not really. She had memorized the shape of the work, but not the substance. And that was the flaw in Victor's plan. You can replace a name, you can reassign a title, but you can't duplicate depth. You can't fabricate context. You can't fake the years it takes to build trust that holds under pressure. I walked past that room without stopping, without speaking, because I didn't need to remind anyone of what was missing. Eventually, they'd feel it for themselves. The absence of understanding, the unraveling of shortcuts, the weight of trying to carry something they didn't build. And when that happened, I'd be ready. Not to reclaim my seat, but to show them, quietly, decisively, what happens when you cut out the foundation and expect the walls to stand on their own. I arrived earlier than usual, not to make a point, but to make space, for thought, for structure, for quiet strategy. By the time the office lights flickered fully awake, I was already at my desk, sorting through 6 months' worth of records. Contracts, proposal drafts, delivery logs. I opened my folders, cross-referenced timestamps, and began building what I hadn't been asked to submit. A complete account of everything I had touched, led, or resolved in the Greenspring Initiative. I didn't plan to present it. Not yet. But I needed to remind myself, without emotion, of the truth. I hadn't just been involved. I had built the entire arc from inception to close. What they were now calling a collective effort had been nothing short of authored leadership. But in the vacuum of silence, authorship is easily diluted. And so I turned each page of my own memory, file by file, until the shape of the work returned. Meanwhile, in the open space outside my office, the narrative continued. Eva had started joining more client calls, often with Victor's assistant looping her in last minute. She copied me occasionally, rarely with context. Her tone in emails shifted subtly, less deferential, more declarative, as if by saying the words with enough confidence, she could own the meaning behind them. I didn't correct her. I didn't intervene. I saved every message. One afternoon, I received a Slack ping from a junior strategist I'd mentored years ago. "Hey, quick question. Did we ever finalize the Q2 metrics dashboard for Core Unity before Eva came on? She says there's no record." I blinked, then sent back a screenshot of the archived folder, clearly dated, with the file inside. No commentary. Just the evidence. He replied a minute later. Got it. Weird she didn't know. I didn't answer, because the purpose wasn't to expose anything. Yet, it was to let the gaps accumulate until the silence they'd built around me became an echo they couldn't explain. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. That Friday, I received an unexpected call, directly to my office line. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. Hi, Samantha. This is Marcus Neal, Client Performance at Core Unity. We're reviewing the Green Spring rollout and had a few questions. Would you still be the best person to speak to? I paused. That depends, I said carefully. Have you been redirected? We were, but I'd still prefer to speak with you. He wasn't rude. He wasn't overt. He was simply precise, and that was all the signal I needed. Because for all the ways Victor had tried to erase me internally, the client hadn't bought into the rewrite. Not fully. They still remembered the voice that had steadied the first storm. The name that showed up when it was messy, not just when it was polished. I scheduled a quiet lunch meeting the following week, off-site, no paper trail. Because this wasn't about escalation. It was about alignment. And slowly, I was beginning to understand. My silence hadn't just preserved my position. It had preserved my credibility. And now, the gap between their story and the client's reality was beginning to widen. All I had to do was keep walking the line until it broke entirely under its own contradiction. I met Marcus the following Tuesday at a small cafe near the edge of the business district, just far enough from either office to avoid recognition, just quiet enough for candor. He arrived 5 minutes early. I arrived 10. I was already seated when he walked in, jacket over his arm, expression unreadable. We didn't shake hands. We just exchanged a look. Professional, reserved, but alert. I appreciate you meeting, he said. I didn't want to put anything in writing until I understood what was happening. I nodded. Understandable. He didn't waste time. There's been confusion, he said, around leadership on the Greenspring project. The deliverables have shifted. Deadlines are less precise. And frankly, our team is unclear who's actually in charge. Who have you been told is in charge? I asked. Eva Lansing, he said. Officially, but she hasn't been able to answer questions about the early-stage architecture or the rationale behind the metrics framework. Every time we ask, she redirects. I let the silence stretch a moment before responding. That's because she wasn't there. We figured, he said. What we can't figure out is why. I didn't give him drama. I gave him facts. I led the strategy, managed the prototype failures, handled the investor compliance hurdle in Q2. Every framework you're using was built under my direction. And now? He asked. Now, I said calmly. I'm still here, but not acknowledged. He nodded slowly. That's not acceptable to us. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. The quiet in his voice carried weight. It wasn't sympathy. It was dissatisfaction with a system that tried to edit the truth while the people who lived the truth were still present. When we left the cafe, he shook my hand this time. You may be hearing from Ellen soon, he said. She's not thrilled. Neither was I replied. But I didn't sound angry. I sounded ready. That evening, I drafted a single email. Not to Marcus, not to Ellen, not to Victor. I sent it to myself. Subject line, timeline of ownership, Greenspring, March to November. I outlined every step I had taken, with files to match. I didn't plan to send it, but I wanted it waiting, ready, for the moment someone tried to frame the story again. Because stories, once challenged, don't vanish. They fracture. And when enough cracks appear, people stop believing the cover and start asking who really wrote the first page. By Friday, Diane from HR pinged me. Her message was short. Just a heads up, your name came up during the investor prep call. Naomi from Elridge asked a very specific question. Naomi. I hadn't spoken to her in over 4 years, but I knew her. Sharp, director, zero tolerance for political misdirection. If she was asking questions, it meant someone was already connecting the dots, and that was the moment I knew. I wouldn't have to raise my voice. Someone else had already started listening. All I had to do now was hold my ground and let the questions do the rest. The following Monday started like any other. Too many unread emails, too much forced energy in the break room, too little awareness of what was already unraveling. But I saw the signs. They were never loud, never obvious, just slightly off. A canceled sync meeting from Victor's calendar, an unexpected delay in Eva's update deck, and then an uncharacteristic silence from the leadership team group chat. Something had shifted, and I hadn't lifted a finger. I kept my rhythm steady, responded to what was mine, ignored what wasn't, and waited. The message came at 10:17 a.m. Diane from HR again, short, blunt. Naomi asked to see documentation of your involvement with Greenspring. She copied 2 board members. It's real now. I closed my laptop. Not in panic, in readiness, because I had prepared for this moment. Not in aggression, but in alignment. The facts were already filed, the timeline already written, the evidence already collated. I wasn't chasing retribution. I was waiting for gravity to do what it always does. Return the weight of every decision back to its origin. At noon, Ava walked past my office. She didn't look in. Her pace was fast, clipped, unsure. The last time she'd passed by, her heels had clicked with certainty. Today, they barely touched the floor. I returned to my inbox. A new message. Subject: Request for clarification. Strategic oversight. Q1 to Q3. Sent from procurement. Copied to Victor and me. I didn't respond immediately. I gave it 1 hour, then sent the summary. 12 bullet points. 3 attachments. No adjectives, no opinion. Just clean history. Within 15 minutes, the response came. Thank you. This will be helpful for the committee discussion tomorrow. Committee, discussion. Tomorrow. I didn't need more detail. I knew what that meant. The unraveling wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was scheduled. The next morning, the calendar invite hit. Victor Crane, Executive Review, 10 a.m., Conference Room 4B. No agenda, no attachments, just tension. At 9:58, I arrived. On time, not early, not eager, just present. Victor was already there. Tie slightly askew, face tight. Eva sat to the side, silent, eyes on the floor. 3 board members were seated. One of them, Naomi. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Samantha, she began, we'd like to walk through the strategic timeline of Greenspring, including your documented contributions. I opened my folder, calm, prepared, and handed it over. Everything's in there, I said. If anything's missing, let me know. I can provide the originals. The room fell quiet. Pages turned, heads nodded. Not because I had made a point, but because the point had made itself. Victor cleared his throat. There were many people involved. It's been a fluid structure. A structure? Naomi said flatly. Built on someone else's work. Without acknowledgement, without accuracy. He looked down. Eva still hadn't spoken. I didn't gloat. I didn't lean in. I just waited. Because this was never about revenge. It was about gravity. And now it was doing exactly what I knew it would. Victor shifted in his chair, hands folded a little too tightly, as if the pressure might hold his narrative together a bit longer. In hindsight, he said slowly, Perhaps the transition wasn't handled with full clarity, but the intention. Naomi cut him off, not unkindly, but with precision. We're not here to evaluate intention. We're here to reconcile facts. She turned to the final page of my documentation and tapped the client signature timestamp. This was the closing document, yes? Victor nodded. And who was the client liaison listed at the time? Silence. Then a quiet reply. Samantha. Thank you, she said, as if that answered more than the question itself. Eva, still silent, shifted uncomfortably. Her posture had collapsed into itself. Her polished poise now looked like something borrowed that no longer fit. One of the other board members cleared his throat. Ms. Rhodes, he said, addressing me directly. In light of this, would you consider rejoining the project as strategic lead? Officially? I took a breath. Not out of shock, but out of calculation. I appreciate the offer, I said calmly. But I've already been approached by Core Unity to advise them directly. That's the relationship I'm choosing to honor. A long pause filled the room, not with awkwardness, but gravity. That said, I continued, I'm open to supporting the transition, on my terms, because I care about the integrity of the work more than the politics around it. Victor looked down. Eva didn't look at anyone. Naomi simply nodded. Understood. I stood, not abruptly, not defiantly, just decisively, and left the room with my name intact, no longer in question, no longer shadowed by silence. Word spread faster than expected. By the afternoon, 3 different teams had forwarded me quiet messages of support. A junior analyst I barely knew slipped a post-it under my door. It read, "Thank you for not disappearing." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the welcome folder from Core Unity. My name printed cleanly on top. No title, no qualifiers, just mine. It felt earned, not gifted, solid, not symbolic. Meanwhile, back at Norview, the unraveling continued. Procurement paused 2 pipeline initiatives. Compliance requested an internal audit of project handovers, and HR updated 2 role descriptions, one of them without a name attached anymore. I didn't smile, I didn't toast, I just exhaled, because this wasn't about them losing, it was about the truth finally having room to stand upright. They had tried to remove me from the frame, but all they had done was expose how much of the picture I had held together. Not with noise, not with power plays, but with quiet, steady, undeniable presence. And now, that presence had left the building, with the only part they couldn't replace, the trust. It didn't happen in a single moment. There was no dramatic announcement, no slamming doors, no names crossed out on walls. Just a slow withdrawal, first of confidence, then of coherence. Within a week of the executive review, procurement froze all large-scale client presentations pending alignment reviews, a harmless-sounding delay, but those of us who understood the system knew exactly what it meant. No one trusted what was being presented anymore. And it wasn't just a leadership issue, it was structural. Ava's name was quietly removed from the company newsletter. Her title disappeared from the org chart. When people asked where she was, the answers got vaguer by the day. Out sick. Working remotely. Between roles. But I knew. She hadn't left the building yet, but she had already been erased from its language. Meanwhile, Victor tried to maintain control. He scheduled a vision alignment town hall, opened it with energy that didn't reach his eyes, and spoke about the need to adapt in times of change. It was full of familiar phrases, agility, innovation, stakeholder synergy, but none of it landed. Because everyone in that room had watched what happened when the company chose image over substance and style over stewardship. They had seen what happens when you remove the architect and ask the blueprint to hold itself up. I wasn't in that town hall. I didn't need to be. My absence was its own presence now. By Thursday, the client sent their own signal. Core Unity released a press statement announcing the creation of a new advisory division focused on sustainable scaling, and listed me as the lead consultant. My name. Not my company, not my former title. Just me. The ripple was immediate. Slack channels lit up. Former colleagues sent vague congratulations that read more like apologies. And in the executive suite, the silence thickened. I didn't respond. I didn't clarify. I didn't correct. I just continued doing the work, now with a different email address, a different contract, and a level of clarity no organizational restructure could take away. That weekend, Diane messaged again. Victor's walking a line, the board's watching him closely. I replied with 2 words, let them. Because it was no longer my burden to interpret the consequences. It was his turn to explain. The following Monday, I passed by Norview's lobby on my way to a nearby client lunch. A familiar face at reception did a double take. You visiting? They asked. I smiled. Not anymore. Because I wasn't returning. I wasn't circling back. I wasn't waiting to be called. I had already stepped into something that no longer needed the old narrative to justify its place. The collapse was happening, and for once, I wasn't the one holding it up. By midweek, it became official. Victor was placed under review by the board, pending a formal inquiry into project oversight, client satisfaction decline, and internal misrepresentation. The language was careful, neutral, distant. But everyone knew what it meant. He had lost control, not because of one decision, but because of a pattern that finally caught up to him. Ava resigned the next day. A short message on LinkedIn. Grateful for the experience, looking ahead to new opportunities. No comment section, no endorsements, just a post that hung in digital air, like a door closing without a sound. Inside Norview, the unraveling continued. Client renewals were suddenly paused for review. Q4 forecasts were revised downward. The people who had once championed Victor's direction now began stepping back, speaking more softly, using phrases like, "We didn't have full visibility," and "there were communication breakdowns." The irony wasn't lost on me. Visibility had never been the problem. It was willful blindness. The kind that dismisses quiet strength because it doesn't demand the room's attention. And now, in that quiet, the collapse had taken shape. But I wasn't watching with satisfaction. I was working, on calls with Core Unity, in rooms where decisions were no longer filtered through layers of hierarchy, with teams who valued clarity over hierarchy, competence over charisma. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was simply building forward. One afternoon, I received a call from a former colleague. He sounded hesitant, careful. Hey, just wanted to say what you did, how you handled it. It taught me a lot. Thank you, I said. And I meant it, because those moments mattered more than any public vindication. Later that day, I passed by the building one last time. Not on purpose. It was just on the way to another meeting. But I paused across the street. The glass doors, the marble floors, the receptionist tapping quietly at the desk. It all looked the same. But it wasn't. Because the story they'd tried to control had already left the building. It was in the conversations happening in private DMS, in the shift in tone from clients, in the leadership memos now written with more caution, more humility, and in the new hires asking, "Who was Samantha Rhodes?" The answer was no longer up to them. It was out there now, in the way a system reorganized itself after trying to delete its center, in the way a client refused to be handed off, in the way silence turned into structure. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I had already taken everything I needed with me. The work, the clarity, the name they tried to strip from the deal. And that name now stood not beside a title, but beside a standard. One they couldn't replace. One they couldn't control. One that no matter how they rewrote the story, would always return to the same conclusion. She was the one who built it. I didn't celebrate. There was no dinner, no toast, no need for anyone to clap me on the back. What happened wasn't a victory. It was a return to alignment. And alignment doesn't feel loud. It feels steady. Core Unity made the offer official a week after the press release. I met with Ellen and Marcus in their new downtown office, this time not as a vendor, not as a fallback option, but as someone they trusted enough to shape their strategic infrastructure moving forward. The contract was straightforward. Independent consultant, full autonomy, direct access to the executive team, no intermediaries, no second guessing, no posturing, just trust. Earned, not requested. I signed it with the same pen I'd stopped carrying months ago. It had waited in the bottom drawer of my home office through everything. Quiet, familiar, forgotten. But now it felt right again. Useful. Whole. The first day at the new office, Ellen greeted me with a smile that held no pity, no apology, only certainty. "This should have happened sooner," she said. I smiled back. It happened exactly when it was supposed to. Because I knew something now. Being early doesn't guarantee recognition. Being right doesn't guarantee reward. But staying true to the work, even when the system tries to erase you, that builds something time can't undo. The view from my new workspace wasn't grand, just a corner with light, but it felt earned, not given, not negotiated, not borrowed, mine. On the wall behind me, I didn't hang plaques. I framed the original project roadmap I had built for Greenspring, not as a reminder of what they tried to take, but of what they couldn't. Ownership, integrity, design. The conversations I had now were different, not because I spoke more, but because I didn't need to defend every word. People listened because they had already seen the proof. I didn't have to introduce myself. My work did that for me. And slowly, without fanfare, a new kind of presence began to build around me. Not fame, not noise, just consistency. The kind people trust when everything else begins to fray. Back at Norview, I heard whispers through the usual channels. Victor's transition was finalized. No return, no press release. Ava had disappeared entirely from the company portal. Diane left 6 weeks later. "Too much cleanup, not enough accountability," she'd written in a text. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to carry the weight of that system anymore. It had tried to define me by its silence. But I had turned that silence into structure, into story, into something they would never fully reclaim. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of a legacy they couldn't overwrite. 2 months later, I was invited to speak at a private leadership roundtable. Nothing flashy, just a closed-door session for mid-sized firms trying to retain female talent in executive roles. I didn't use a PowerPoint. I didn't tell them what to do. I just told a story about what happens when loyalty is mistaken for silence, about what happens when profit becomes a reason to erase, not reward, about how some of the most crucial roles in any company are played by people no one remembers, until they're gone. Afterward, a young manager approached me. She didn't ask for advice. She just said, "I thought I was imagining it. What you described, it felt like you were describing my job." I looked her in the eye. "You're not imagining it. You're carrying more than they see. Document everything. And don't disappear." She nodded. That moment mattered more than any compensation package ever had. Because legacy isn't built in applause, it's built in recognition, the kind that passes quietly between those who've learned the hard way that being good at what you do doesn't protect you, but refusing to be erased. That changes everything. At Core Unity, things moved forward. I wasn't framed as a savior. I was framed as a partner. New hires joined the team, some of them women who had stories similar to mine. Stories that had ended too soon, paused without closure. Now, they had space to begin again, on terms defined by clarity, not compliance. I still walked by the old office sometimes, on the way to meetings. Not often, but enough. I never felt bitterness. I just felt distance, like looking through a pane of glass at a place that once believed it could replace a person with a persona, and not pay the price. My name had disappeared from their directories, but not from the memories that mattered. Clients remembered, colleagues remembered, even silence remembered. Because when people ask how I got here, I don't tell them about the betrayal. I tell them about the decision to keep showing up anyway, quietly, consistently, on my terms. The story wasn't about getting even, it was about getting clear. And in the end, that clarity did more than reclaim what was mine. It built something better, not a comeback. A beginning, one that no one else could rewrite.